All right. I think we're going to get started. Can you all hear me? Donna, you can hear me? Okay. All right. Meg, you can hear me from here? Okay. I did have a principal voice one time in my life, but all right. So we're good evening, everybody. We're going to start our budget presentation. Thank you for being here. I know it's middle of the winter here, and happy to have you here. We're going to go through, give you some context about our budget for this upcoming school year, and then we want to hear from you. We want to get some ideas from you. I'm Steve Zreich, the superintendent of schools, and I'm joined by Elizabeth Bully, who is the assistant superintendent for finance and operations. Our deputy superintendent is here, Kate Carboni. Jen Doucetli, our special education director, is back there as well. Our communications director is here. And I also want to, Chris O'Donnell, and I'd also like to acknowledge that Mary Manning from the school committee is here as well. We are filming this. Don't worry, we're not filming you. We're filming us so that we can share this with other folks who weren't able to be here. And we're not going to film the breakout session. So don't worry about that. So this year is an interesting budget season. It's the most challenging budget season that I've had in Salem, and maybe among the most challenging in my career. But we've been working hard at it. We've known that this was coming for a while. We knew that we had some challenges going into this school year, and then we settled an important contract, which was really important for us to do to be more competitive with other communities. Certainly averted any interruptions in schooling that other communities had, and I'm really appreciative of the work we did with the STU. I want to acknowledge that the president is here, Ann Berman, and as well as you know, the cost of everything is going up and has been going up, and so all of that it factors into this budget. But we've been hard at work looking at different scenarios, having discussions. These conversations are super important with our families. I got a chance to meet with students yesterday, and they give me the most interesting ideas, and sometimes the things that nobody else thinks about. And we're starting to now meet with our different stakeholder groups to get feedback and input on this budget process. I'm really proud of the work that's happening in the Salem Public Schools right now. If you want to go to the next slide. We have very clear core values as a system. I think we do a strong job of trying to live up to those values as a system, belonging, equity, and opportunity. And we're really committed to these values and our priorities as a system. We're very proud of the success that we've had over the last few years. In the last year, we've seen a lot of improvements in our performance as a school district. Our schools are leading the pack for gateway cities in Massachusetts in a lot of different indicators. Very excited about building a new high school. We're very excited about having better teacher retention than we've had in a long time. We're excited that we have not better chronic absenteeism, but lower chronic absenteeism, and that students are coming to school more than ever. We're very excited about growing our advanced coursework at the high school, the early college program, the CTE program. As you know, we've had a robust arts program for a long time. So there's a lot of things to be really proud of that we really are committed to trying to preserve. And we do think we can do that. We think we can preserve a lot of what makes our system special and that we know works for kids right now. Obviously, we want to hear from all of you. We'll have opportunities in the next few weeks to hear from our teachers. We want to hear from students. And Elizabeth will go through with you what that timeline is before the school committee has to vote on a final budget for the upcoming school year. Next slide. I just want to go back to we're in the midway point of what has been a successful strategic plan in many areas. We haven't been perfect everywhere, but we've seen a lot of gains, and you can, if you want to spend time reading about each element, but our four core priorities are, the first one is about all our academic work. It's about elevating learning. The second is about how we empower our educators to want to work, grow, and stay in Salem, which we think we've made some good inroads, especially with our new contract and some of the provisions that are part of that. The third is really critical around making sure our kids want to be in our schools, right? That they feel like they belong and are connected in our schools. Now more than ever, we need to make sure our schools are places that everybody feels like they're included and can thrive. And then finally, we always have to worry about our infrastructure, the systems, our buildings, ensuring that we support our schools in every way we can, so that the work that happens in classrooms can help. What happens in classrooms benefits students directly. So those are our 4 core priorities. And I'm going to pass it off to Elizabeth, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the budget context before we hear from all of you. So
Great.
Elizabeth.
Good evening, everyone. I am Elizabeth Pauley. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations. Thanks for being here. I did just want to call out the person who was busy signing everyone in when we began, and that is Camilla Salazar. She's actually our Director of Financial Operations at the Salem Public Schools, so deeply immersed in the budget process with the rest of the team. Just so we know who's in the room, could, by show of hands, who would consider themselves a community member in Salem? Okay. Who would consider themselves a parent of a Salem Public School student or graduate? Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for being here this evening. Most of our funding comes from the city of Salem, and so it is really important that we hear from you as residents, as community members, and thank you for your generous support of the schools over time. And it's especially important to hear from parents who are sending us their children every day, or who have sent their children, and we have together helped to graduate and launch those children onto their careers. Last week, we did a trial run of this presentation with a group of parents who said, just get to it. Just get to the questions. Let's talk about the tough budget season ahead. So I've tried to cut down a little bit on the context of the budget and sort of what goes into it. But because we are a small group, if at any time you have questions, please feel free to stop me. So here's the budget timeline. It actually starts in October. I like to say it's always budget season. But in October, DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, holds the enrollment that we have on the 1st of October as our official enrollment. And they use that to determine how much aid we should be getting. The aid is based on a formula. I'll talk more about that later. It informs something called Chapter 70 funding, which is based on the number of students, the type of students, and then our ability to pay. But all of that starts with who is enrolled in our schools in October. Throughout the fall and into the winter, we are not only educating students and running our schools and creating joyful learning environments, we are also looking at our data to see where we need to lean in, where we need to refocus, and where we need to double down. So we are looking at our data to figure out what should be our priorities for this year and what should be our priorities for next year. This is where we are. We're in the middle of those conversations, or sort of coming to the tail end of some of those data conversations, and we're moving into community conversations around what next year is looking like and what we should prioritize in our budget. We will then use that to inform the budget proposal that we bring to school committee in April. The first presentation is at the beginning of April. We'll have a budget hearing after that, and then the school committee will vote on whether to approve our FY26 budget at the end of April. From there, it goes to the city council approves it, and then it will go into effect on July 1. So here's where we are. Thank you for being part of the community conversations. This slide will be familiar to many of you. Our FY25, that's the current fiscal year budget, is $74 million. That is a 4.83% increase over last year. Now, if you were if you attended any of the budget presentations last spring, you'll know that we are actually spending more than $74 million this year because of rising costs, which we'll talk more about later. And so we actually are spending closer to $80 million, and we have offset those additional costs with one-time money. I'm telling you that now because it will come up later. This slide shows our appropriation. Those are the vertical bars. That's our budget over time. You can see in FY19, our appropriation was 57 million. This year, it's 74 million. So a steady increase. And this is our state aid, Chapter 70. So this year, it is $29 million. And the rest of it comes from lots of different sources, including primarily the city of Salem. Here's what it looks like when we divide it into two buckets: personnel, which is all of the people who get paid by the Salem Public Schools, and non-personnel, which is everything else: the lights, the heat, the curriculum, etc. It's about 75% of our budget is people, and the rest of it is non-personnel expenses. Both have been rising significantly and are expected to continue to rise into the next year. So as I mentioned, the city of Salem is our largest funder. It's typically at least 2/3 of our budget comes from the city of Salem. It's edging up every year and actually getting closer to about 70% of our expected budget for next year. Over time, that contribution has increased significantly. Part of that is a function of the formula. So in October, when DESE says, how many students do you have? Who are your students? What will it cost to educate them? They also look and say, what can Salem afford to pay? And in DESE's mind, that amount has increased year over year. So that's our local revenue, the largest part of our budget. The next part is Chapter 70 and our state aid. Chapter 70 is most of the aid that we get from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I mentioned this year it's 29 million. In the coming year, it's expected to be 31 million. How do I know that? The governor just released her budget in January and identified this as our likely Chapter 70. We also get money from something called Circuit Breaker, which is a reimbursement program for special education costs. So the state says there's a threshold for what we could spend for individual students. And when we spend over that amount, the state will reimburse us 75% of the difference, what's over the threshold. In the coming year, it could be 2.9 million. I have it as 2.5 million here as a placeholder. We get reimbursed for students that we send to charter schools. So in the first year that a student goes to the charter school, we get 100% of the tuition back. In the next year, we get 60, and the next year we get 40, and then we get nothing. So this coming year, we are expecting to get $1.4 million back in charter school reimbursements, assuming that that is fully funded. And then school choice. For students who do not live in Salem, but who opt into our schools, they pay tuition. It is about $5,000, and we take in about $500,000 each year for school choice students. Yes?
Is that charter school reimbursement only for charter schools outside of the city of Salem, or does that include the Salem Academy?
That includes Salem Academy. It's any charter school that our students attend.
We have very few kids who go to charters that don't go to Salem Academy. There's a few scattered ones. That Mount Charter would be an example, but most of the kids that we get the reimbursement for are Salem Academy schools.
It's a good question, thank you. And then last, we do receive federal grants. So in recent years, we've received up to $15 million. On average, it's about $7 or $8 million a year that we receive. You may be aware that in fact, if you've come to any of these presentations before, you will be aware of the fact that during the pandemic, we received flexible aid called ESSER, which was used to help students recover from the pandemic. We got about $3 million a year from ESSER and no longer have those funds. That funding source has been spent and that program has sunsetted. You may also be aware that there is a certain level of uncertainty, let's say, at the federal level. And so the federal grants is a little bit of a question mark for us this year. So when we think about the budget for next year, we need to prioritize educating the nearly 4,000 students who show up every day and whom we are committed to the success of. Those students are going to continue to need a diverse range of programs, of supports. We want to provide them with enrichment and opportunity, and that isn't changing. And in fact, our students, as they come to us, it turns out are needing more and different diverse programs. So this is growing, and we are committed to making sure we deliver for our students. And at the same time, our costs are going up. So it's possible our non-personnel costs will go up between 6 and 9%. And just if you have the handout or if you're looking here, this little swoopy sign is not a negative. That is a just about sign. So don't mistake this. I don't actually know what it's called, but don't mistake it for a negative. That is a, approximation sign. So how do I come to these approximations? Well, for transportation, we know what our contract is going to be next year, and we expect that it will go up 4%. Now that could change if the number of buses we need, the number of riders we need, that could change. Homeless transportation, because we are obligated to and committed to providing transportation for students who are experiencing homelessness, those costs have increased dramatically over the last few years. I think we budgeted 2 years ago $800,000, and we spent about $1.3 million. And that is because the number of families experiencing homelessness continues to grow. And we want them in our schools, we welcome them, and the cost to transport the students have increased pretty significantly. Our utility bills continue to increase. That won't be a shock to you. That's probably happening in every home, certainly in the Commonwealth. But we had been locked in with the city to a lower rate for our electricity, and that rate was renegotiated last year. So we got a great deal relative to the deals that were out there, but we are expecting our electricity bills to go up next year by about 20%. In addition, the building that we are in has kind of runaway heat and cold. And what I mean by that is we have trouble controlling it because the systems are so old. The good news is we're going to build a new school, but for now, it is a challenge to maintain the HVAC in this building, and in some of our others as well. So our utilities will go up. We have a growing number of students who need out-of-district placements. So this special ed tuitions line, we are anticipating about an 8% growth. We're not certain yet because not every place that accepts our students for out-of-district placements have set their rates for next year, but our numbers have increased steadily, and these costs over the last few years have gone up pretty significantly. Last year, it was on average 8%. The year before, it was 14%. So this is a growing line item. And then our personnel costs are anticipated to go up by about 9%. Now, as Dr. Zreich mentioned, we recently settled a contract that was a direct tie to our strategic priority of empowering educators, recruiting educators, helping them stay here, grow, and be successful with our students. So that was an intentional choice. But it will contribute to the increase in our personnel costs for next year. I would say, even if we hadn't settled the contract, our personnel costs go up every year. So this number is higher than what we've seen, but our personnel costs regularly increase by, on average, 5 or 6% in a year, even when we don't have a contract. So we need to continue serving our students. We know that our costs are going up by these estimations, and we don't actually know what our full revenue picture is. So we know what our Chapter 70 will be. It will be $31 million. But we don't know what our largest funder will be able to do, and that is the City of Salem. So if we assume that the City of Salem is able to appropriate on average what they have done for the schools in previous years. And by that I mean, on average, the annual increase for our budget has gone up about 3.5%. So if I assume that our revenue and our appropriation is going to go up by 3.5%, knowing what I showed you on the last slide with our increasing costs, we could have a budget gap. We will have a budget gap, but we could have a budget gap that is between $4 and $4 million next year. That is a large gap for a $74 million annual budget. And we have been working with principals, department heads, and now the community to say, okay, how can we close this? If our expenses are outpacing our revenue, how do we close this gap? Expenses are increasing. We don't know what our revenue picture is quite yet. We do not have flexible dollars, and there is uncertainty at the federal level. Then we will need to cut expenses and increase our revenue. So that is the picture for next year, with possibly a large budget gap. So as I said, we have been looking at our data, thinking about what we could live without and still serve students well. And so what we'd like to do is get your advice about what we can do to close that budget gap and still serve students well. The idea that Dr. Zreik and I had for this conversation is that we would break into two groups. Now, happily, this is a good-sized group that could stay as one. And so by show of hands, who would like to break into two groups? That feels like a resounding vote for, by show of hands, who would like to stay in one group? Oh, yeah. Okay, great. So
Can I just, maybe this is a good time to come up any clarifying questions about what was presented before we go into groups.
Yes.
To see if you have any questions about our budget.
And I sped through that as promised so that we could get right to the conversation. But yes, the floor is open. Lisa.
I have a bunch of small questions,
Okay.
but I'm gonna skip them all for three big questions, and you can take in any order that you want. One question, I know we're spending, it's like 300,000-ish annually on the lease for the space in the mall, and there's been a desire to get out of that, and I wondered about the status of that.
Yeah.
The second question is transportation, which is, I think, a little over $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
How far along we are in the conversations about intra-district choice and assignment policy, which fast forward at some point would theoretically bring the transportation costs down if we have kids primarily in neighborhood schools. And number three, which is the big one, we've been talking for years about how we have too many schools for the number of students we have. We've now closed the middle school at Saltonstall. We still have too many students for the number of schools that we have. Are we talking about closing a school, which was discussed at budget season and in the context of the teacher contract last year? So those are like three big numbers. I will skip the small questions.
So I will follow up with you about the small questions later.
Yes.
And you can ask them later if you want to, but we'll start with these big ones. If you didn't hear Lisa's big questions, which I'm going to repeat, and then I'm going to let you take a stab at, unless you want me to take a stab at them.
No, I can take a stab.
Okay. The first big question was about the lease at the mall. We have two schools that are housed at the Witch City Mall. It is about $300,000 a year. And Lisa wanted to know what the status of getting out of the mall and possibly recouping that $300,000. The second question, if you didn't hear it, was about transportation, which is over $1 million a year for regular day transportation. That's the pickup and drop off for our 1,800 students. What is the status of the conversations related to intra-district choice and having parents able to choose the school for their students compared to neighborhood schools, which the question was, would that save us transportation money? And then the last question was, what is the status of the conversation about the number of schools we have? We have talked at previous gatherings, last year's budget season, during the collective bargaining conversations, that we may need to close a school. So what is the status of those conversations? So would you like to start with the first one?
Thank you, Lisa, for those softball questions. So the first thing is, I would say we went into this year with three big things happened this year or happening. One is we had to settle our contract, which actually got settled quicker than I thought it might. And so it didn't go into the fall. Number two, we made a decision on the middle school at Saltonstall. So that's a transition that's happening this year. And the third was we had to decide what the grade configuration was going to be for the new building here. There was a lot of talk about 7 to 12 versus 9 to 12. And in case you didn't hear last night, the school committee voted that this would be a 9 to 12 building, not a 7 to 12. Because of a lot of discussions, finances were part of it, programmatic concerns. Ms. Manning, if you want to have a chat with her later, you can talk about that. But on the other two, we need to get out of the mall. We tried really hard to do that last year, and we got a little egg on our face. We were hoping to go to Salem State. It did not work out, so we got tied into another 2-year lease. I think everybody, and Mayor, if he were here, would say we're all committed to getting out of there after the end of next year. And so, I mean, just because we have a budget challenge now, but we also are facing another challenging year from now. So I would say that we got to get out of the mall. We got to stop paying, $300,000 for those schools. And so I would say that's a year away in that discussion. Connected to that is what kind of space we have in other buildings. I do think we have to close the school. We're not ready to do that for this fall, but we're going to need to be ready for that a year from now. I think we wanted to see how things settled with the high school. We have a lot of space at the elementary school level. Now that Salt and Stall is no longer middle school, there's space there. Witchcraft has a lot of space. A lot of our elementary schools, there is space. Horace Mann has a lot of space because we rent out a huge chunk of it to Pathways, Head Start. So I have talked to the school committee about the idea that this summer we're going to have to start talking about what that looks like a year from now, and I think it's necessary. We're running too many schools for the number of students that we have. And then what was the third question?
That was the third question.
Transportation. So the school choice, I know the school committee, if you heard last night, did talk a little bit, and Mary, you can jump in at any point here and save me on these questions, but there was a discussion, there is a lot of movement and interest in talking about the choice process. We need to have somebody help study it for us. We've been talking to somebody actually who's a Salem resident who has experience with looking at choice models around the country and the state. And so I do think there's an appetite to look at that. That is very complicated, clearly. It would save a lot of money in transportation, but there are pros and cons to it. We have pretty integrated schools right now. When you look at our demographics, Salem is one of the most integrated cities when it comes to school demographics. But there's also the cost of having 5 buses go to the same stop or 6 buses go to the same stop and zooming all over the city. So I do think, though, you're hitting on what the conversations are going to need.
So we're good for a year from now in all these things.
I don't know about the school choice conversation. That's, I think, a little longer out. But I think closing a school and getting out of the mall are two things that need to be imminent in the next year. Not for this fall, but for the fall after. Do you want to add anything to that, Ms. Manning, since you're here? I did all right. I mean, I didn't say anything that was.
No, I just would reiterate the whole issue of we really want the integrated school. We don't want to do something that upsets that. But it's a tough one because the transportation to do that is it's brilliant. So it's going to be interesting to see what we get back on feedback of the person that Steve was referring to, looking at models. But I guess I would just say we're not ready to make a move yet because it's really important enough to do the very best we can to figure it out. Whenever it is.
Stupid question, there would be an expense that would diminish over time, right? Because we would still have to transport.
That's right. You have to grandfather kids in.
Schools.
That's correct. I would, I would expect that at this time next year, we'll be talking very specifically about a school closure and about getting out of the rent. I mean, I would expect that you would hear that. There's just a lot. We only have the bandwidth to do so much in a year, and we want to make sure that what we do is done well for kids. Otherwise, it creates chaos for the system. And there's a lot of lessons learned from closing schools in the past, and we want to make sure we do it thoughtfully and So it's never a good conversation to have, but when realistically, we're running way too many buildings we have 11 schools for less than 4,000 kids. There are districts that are much bigger than us running fewer schools than we are. So, other questions?
I would have liked to have seen in this personnel versus non-personnel chart a more breakdown of the type of personnel, so that when we're having this conversation, we had a little more information about, are we administrative heavy, are we not, what are the ratios of administrators and teachers to student ratios? I think that information is missing in this discussion.
I'll take the blame for that. Because of the previous conversation that we had with some parents, we didn't get to the part where parents could talk, and I said to Elizabeth later here, okay, you gotta get rid of some of those in the beginning where you're showing all these statistics.
66.
Because then it ran way over because people want to keep talking.
Yeah.
And the slides with what you guys do.
Yeah, so I have a slide for that, which I can put up, but I don't have the ratios off the top of my head. However, the largest group of employees is teachers and members of the STU. When we put together both units of the STU, the teachers and the PSRP, the paraprofessional support personnel. Am I missing an R? No, paraprofessional support
Paraprofessionals and support personnel.
and support personnel.
Related,
that's the R. They are two units of the Salem Teachers Union. It's almost 70% of our staff are either members of the PSRP, paraprofessionals, family engagement facilitators, occupational therapy assistants, speech language pathology assistants. Did I say behavior specialists? Subs, building subs. So tutors. So it's that group of people, and the teachers make up nearly or around 70% of our employees. And then I don't have the percentages for clerks, custodians, and central office. The central office is actually quite small relative to our 900 employees. We do have people budgeted to the central office, but there are people often who are in schools every day. So when you look at the people who are budgeted to the central office and spend all day or could spend all day in the central office, what did we say, Mary? It was, fewer than 50 for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Closer probably to 30, 35.
We did take a really close look at this the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And it was interesting how many people are actually in the budget, so they would be in these charts and the pie charts as central office people, and like a traveling music teacher who doesn't have a specific school that they call a base, then they are assigned in the budget as a central office person. Different positions like that probably might drive by the central office sometime on that one day in another place, but really not central office people. But it does push a number of it, push the percentage. And people are like, how can we need all these administrators? And it's like, when you really delve into it, it's really separated out and break it down.
Yeah,
And I think we have to do a better job of explaining that and getting that word out and identifying folks, which we do. We have 2 or 3 different sort of scenarios going on the whiteboards and what's going on.
The other big one is the medical help, is the other piece of it, like non-teacher,
Right.
non-admin nurses.
Right. I don't have that number, Lisa.
Thank you, that's helpful.
But Donna, I will just say this. I think we are going to be very transparent with when you're cutting $4 million from a budget, right? People are going to ask, right, how much of that impacts kids directly. So when we present to the public and the school committee in our first presentation, we'll be pretty clear about that, and we know that we're going to have to. It's important that it's clear that. Percentage-wise, that there isn't more of an impact to children, direct impact to children, than there is to like back office, administrative support. It is a balance because you do have to run the school district, but I think it would be irresponsible for us not to share transparently what the breakdown is, and that there's clarity that we're doing everything we can to eliminate, if we have to eliminate from our budget, that it's coming as far away from children as possible. So I would stay tuned on that. To their point, though, what is budgeted to the central office isn't always, like Mary said, it could be a music staff member who travels. And we're actually going to sit down with the teachers union pretty soon, because we want to be on the same page. Like, who do teachers and staff think actually? Like, let's be on the same page of who actually is a central office staff member, and who is and which staff members are spending the bulk of their time in schools. And I think we have to be clear with the public about that, especially in a year when we have these kinds of reductions. Other questions that folks have? I'd also be remiss in not pointing out like two things that really are this is maybe a little bit of a prayer, but we're always looking for money to drop from the sky. One is that Salem is actually still not getting their fair share from the formula. The Student Opportunity Act was meant to really support districts that had high need populations. It has actually been a burden to Salem over that period of time. And we talked about this last night. There was a meeting, there's a public meeting before the school committee about the budget situation. More of the burden is falling on the city of Salem, as Elizabeth said, than it should have been. The formula perceives Salem to be a richer community than it actually is. And there's a flaw in that formula. So your state representatives, your state senator, they're working on that. We hear that there's some interest and sort of appetite to make that adjustment. I'm not super optimistic, but it is problematic that we continue to, over time, Salem has had to pay more than other like communities in the state of Massachusetts. So that's one thing. The other piece that we're hopeful is the state put a lot of money into pre-K this year and made a commitment that they were going to fund pre-K in gateway cities. We went out ahead 2 or 3 years ago and funded pre-K in our schools. We're hopeful that will see some of that money. In fact, I was trying to text with the Secretary of Education today to see whether that the money that they put in the budget could go to communities like ours, which would help subsidize some of our budget. We pay for, we have 192 pre-K students in the Salem Public Schools, which is a great thing, but we're not seeing the resources that we thought we would from the state with their commitment to funding pre-K. So we're hopeful that some things could shift. And as Elizabeth said, these are just preliminary. This is the governor's preliminary budget, but that could change between now and the time we pass our budget. So I know we want to get into conversation.
Yeah, no, this is a conversation. So if there are other questions, happy to take them before we pick your brains about what questions we should be asking as we shape this budget. So before we transition, any last burning thoughts? This certainly isn't your last opportunity, but any last burning questions on your mind?
Could I just say one thing? When people were thinking about the question that I believe is going to be up there, that, what can we do about it or whatever, I would just like folks to, because I think there's sort of a range of representation, grade level, or whatever in the room, and if you're like a 10th grade parent, if you could try to coach part of your answer in what you would not have wanted eliminated when your child was in the 5th grade, to put a little historical perspective on it too. Don't just think in the present, but try to bring your experience as your child went up through grades into some of your thoughts.
If you see if anybody can guess what the high schooler said to this question yesterday. What can we do without while continue to serve students well? What was number one? I wish it would save a lot of money, but their first, what they
Start later in the day.
no, yonder pouches. They said whatever you're spending on yonder pouches, which is really not that much. It's like they said whatever that is, cut that. That was their first recommendation to me yesterday.
Okay. Well, as you're thinking about burning questions you have, here is a burning question that we have. In your perspective, based on your experience when your child started at Salem Public Schools to today, what are there positions or programs that you think we could live without? Now, I included some examples, not because any decisions have been made, because they haven't. But for example, a program that we could reduce the cost of is transportation. If we stopped transporting kids that we're not required to transport, so kids who live more than 2 miles away from their school, if there's room on the bus, we're happy to take them. We could say that we're not going to do that anymore, and we could reduce the number of buses. So that's just an example of something we could do, a choice we could make to curtail our costs. We could eliminate, we have a late bus that picks students up who stay after at the middle school and the high school for extracurricular activities or for whatever reason they're staying after school. We could eliminate the late bus. We could eliminate positions. So we could eliminate positions in schools. We could eliminate positions in the central office. We could say we're going to increase class sizes and go to what the contract says we need to have as class sizes. Or we could do something else. So I offer these not because these are things we have decided, but to spark your thinking about what do you think we could live without and still serve students well. And just as an aside, last week when I asked this question, the parents wanted to talk more about what we couldn't live without. So I'm going to ask you that next. First, what do you think we could live without or we should consider living without?
I don't want to take up too much. Two thoughts. One, I don't know if it's legal or not, but sending kids to Essex Tech for programming that exists here. So we don't have animal programming. If a kid wants to go to Essex Tech for that, great, but it feels nonsensical to me that we're paying tuition at Essex Tech for programming that exists in the CP program here. And then I also wonder about the bus transportation, if there's a way to bifurcate the socioeconomically challenged versus not. So if you live, if we could provide it for free for beyond what is required by the state for our socioeconomically challenged families, but for our I don't know how to shorten this, but for our non-socioeconomically challenged families, if you only live 1.5 miles away, it's just convenient for you to have the bus, then you can pay for it the way that those families do in many other communities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the brainstorm. Thank you. Other?
I think we have to look at positions that are not student facing first. And we don't, as a teachers union, we've asked, we don't know what those positions are necessarily because everybody has a job to do, everybody's job is important, but we don't know who those non-student facing positions are and if they could be absorbed by other positions. If we talk about increasing class sizes, some teacher, some place is absorbing that work that someone else is already doing.
Right.
So what are the non-student facing positions that could potentially be absorbed in another way by someone else that wouldn't impact students? Because we don't want we just worked really hard to get this contract that is so student friendly. We don't want students impacted in any way, that we can avoid. So we don't know what those positions are. And that would be really helpful to know before we start saying eliminate a position. We don't necessarily know what those positions are. Right? We all know what teachers' positions are. Right? We know what your position is. We can't eliminate you. We can't eliminate Dr. Schreck. But we don't know what positions could potentially be absorbed by another role.
And just on that one, I'm hoping people will throw out ideas. So that's why I'm not reacting like, oh, great idea. But just the idea is to get ideas out on the table. But on that one, I intentionally did not include a list of positions, partly because I didn't want to start a rumor like, oh, those are the positions on the chopping block. So I know it's a hard task, and I think your point is well made.
We started with a list and we're like, no, because obviously people will take a picture of it and then it'll be.
Yeah, no, and it's really hard because there are human beings
Right.
attached
Exactly.
to those positions, so we don't want to say
Yeah.
it's a human being.
Right.
Same way we don't want to say it's a teaching position because it is a position, it's a human being attached to it.
Right.
When we talk about we're going to eliminate positions by retirement, it's fine because the person's retiring, but there's still a human being someplace attached to that job. It's just that person was lucky enough to have reached the age of retirement. It's just really hard to look at human beings or look at positions that human beings are attached to, and know that their impact on kids is whatever it's going to be. I don't know the answers. I mean, you're going to meet with us in a couple of weeks. We're not going to have the answers. We just don't know.
What else? Have you seen anything that you think, oh, I like that, but I don't love it?
I do wonder, just sort of broadly, the question about fees. Is there a way to divide and you don't need to go back to it, but
That's coming. That's the next slide.
but like music clubs, all that stuff, is there a way to divide between the socioeconomically challenged and those who aren't? My kid gets a lot of stuff for free that frankly, like, I could pay for him to participate in band or field trips or other things. I guess that's a question for you. Not do we want to do that, but is there a way?
You know what's interesting is the one thing, and we heard parents tell us, and I have a parent advisory group, and they told us that they were interested in like thinking about the fees. When I brought it up to the students yesterday, that was the one thing they said, absolutely do not. If you start charging for sports, it's gonna be a problem for us, for our teams. They were pretty adamant that like what made Salem special, this is from the high school student perspective, is that we did not have any fees. Like every other community has fees for something. So it's just an interesting question. Parents have said universally, like, I'll pay if I need to for certain things.
I think one way to work around that is when you're signing your student up, and I don't know if the platform that we currently use works in this way, but that there's the option to pay in. Normally, this would cost X, Y, and Z. If you would like to contribute this to Salem's athletic programs or to Salem's band programs or whatever it is, check here, and then people can opt in to pay. I don't know how many people would actually do that, but I agree that people could, you could use that moment when people have to sign up, or at least for sports, where parents have to opt in, to either ask them for a donation to contribute or ask them to, I know that doesn't help with like, this is how much we make, but it might be a bridge from no fees to for people starting to think about fees for sports.
Thank you. So I did, because the conversation is naturally going there, switch to the next slide, which is we can cut our expenses. And if you have thoughts about cutting expenses, we can always go back. But another way to close our budget gap is to raise our revenue. So one way to raise revenue is to institute fees. As Dr. Zweig said, a lot of communities charge fees for elementary band, high school band, sports. We do not charge fees for anything. So these were some of the things that came up from our last conversation with parents. Consider, to your point, Lisa, transportation fees for non-mandatory riders. They were clear that it should be on a sliding scale based on income. Chromebook replacement fees. If a student breaks a Chromebook, we ask them not to do it again and we give them a new one. But we could charge them. Bus passes, when students lose their pass, we replace them. We do not charge fees for sports, as many communities do, or other curricular activities, including art or band, and there are no other fees. So how does that land in terms of equity and opportunity for you?
For me, like, I'm fully on board with the transportation adding fees for non-mandatory riders. We can put it on a sliding fee. A lot of our surrounding communities already charge for all of it. But if by law they live close, Salem's not that big land-wise that we could. There's a lot of kids that would fall in, I think, into that kind of category. Yeah, my only real issue with that is like the Chromebook replacements, just because, yes, it maybe would hopefully instill like we need to be careful with our supplies, but I just feel like it would just further penalize like the people who can't afford to buy a Chromebook, because then their kid, you know, things happen that are truly accidents, and their kid accidentally breaks their Chromebook, and then now their kid isn't accessing curriculum because they can't afford to pay for it. So that's like the one that's in my head, is anything that's going to prohibit a child from accessing the curriculum.
Right, like you don't want a kid being like, I'm not gonna tell anybody it's broken because I wanna pay for it.
Right.
So then they're like working with a poorly functioning or whatever, they're not accessing, so.
Now that lunch is free for everybody, is there a box like socioeconomically disadvantaged? So not like, I look at the transportation and I'm very mindful of how hard we've worked on our absenteeism rate and to get to where we are, and to the extent lack of transportation becomes a hurdle for, that makes, the transportation makes me nervous like from that perspective. And like sliding scale, I just think anybody that would otherwise qualify for free or reduced lunch, we would not want to charge them anything for transportation. Those are exactly our families that we're working so hard to like get the kids here. So I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot that we used, you know, my kids started here, they paid for their lunch. I don't know how that is in nation, that's something we're thinking out or whatever, but.
Is that statewide now?
It's statewide, yeah. So we
No,
do.
but I just think like that used to be like, that would be the determining factor of like, this child has economic need versus this one.
We did charge
It's like
the bus too before COVID.
Yeah.
Busing, there was transportation fees. We stopped that with COVID, and then we never brought them back.
Oh, I thought there
So
was
they did
some-
pay, there was a transportation fee previously, which was before my time, which was before COVID, so.
So there's no transportation fees anymore?
Nope. The only thing we charge for is, we do charge for pre-K after-school program
On a sliding.
on a sliding scale.
Well, you gotta remember there are some fees, I don't know, it's just that, I'm not sure which, you know, do you do something where there's, a low, like if you do them more across the board, and I'm just throwing this out, so you do a small fee for almost all of this, so that it's not a big fee in one place.
Thank you. Did you have is your hand up?
Yeah, that's the transportation issue. There are complaints as far as our safe streets here in Salem. So it's somebody that may live within, a mile, 2 miles, and having to navigate that with the snow on the ground, the way people drive around here, the accidents, that's an issue. So I wouldn't feel comfortable asking my child, we live in North Salem, to cross over North Street and then make their way over to Carlton walking. It's very dangerous that way. There's no way that would happen. And I have a car, I work there, so I take her. But a lot of our parents still live in that same area or throughout areas of town that are not safe to traverse. It's just not. We can't even get people to shovel the snow off of their sidewalks. So then when we have kids walking in the streets versus going to a bus stop that may be a couple blocks away, it's a little safer. So we think we need to keep that in mind as well.
Thank you.
I would also question just, like, how complicated is the process of figuring out, like, who would pay the fees versus not pay the fees? And are we just creating a whole other position that then just deducts from being collected?
That's why I was wondering about, we used to have like the very clear, the free lunch families and the not free lunch families that,
But that's not.
but now that we don't manage that data,
I still would want that.
We do have information about what the families are going or not. It's different than
yeah.
in those days, but
But then somehow of enforcing that when people apply.
it requires people power to coordinate that. So that is something we have to consider, like, do we have the bandwidth to do that? It would have to result in enough of a revenue that would make an impact.
And to Anne's point before, in all of the conversations we're having, we're talking about work that will need to be absorbed by someone.
And if the parents can't afford this, the ones who are losing out are the kids. If we look at, like, this is my thing, if we look at our band kids, how many of our band kids would not be able to ever participate in band if there was a fee for them? Like, this is where some of our kids, this is all that brings them to school, is being able to get to band. That's what gets them there. And this is band because this is my thing. That's all that gets them there. It could be sports. They have to show up in their seat or they can't get on that playing field at the end of the day. If their parent isn't going to be able to pay that fee, not that they don't want to, but they're not able to, what's going to get that kid to school? Forgetting about the Chromebook and the bus pass and all that, but we're talking about getting kids to school. For some of our kids, this is all that gets them there, is getting to that band competition or getting to that field Friday night. If the coach isn't going to let them play because they weren't in their seat that day, because their parent couldn't pay their transportation, what did we just do? Like, what was the benefit?
100%, I see that all the time in my own kids' team experiences here, which is why I also like the idea of there being an opportunity for parents to choose to opt in. At least maybe even just to start, like start people thinking about fees again. Where everything is free, if that is just simply not going to be feasible going forward. I'm not hearing people say, I don't want this team or I don't want this sport here. We like the amount of what we offer here at Salem Schools. And I think the expansion of those things needs to only get better. Hoping that we work our way down into maybe having fifth grade basketball teams again, like other cities do. I definitely am not looking to take anything out. So is there a way for people to opt in that helps subsidize? There's lots of places where, just in general fundraising that I've done here, where we offer for parents to pay for another kid to participate. So to me, it's the conversation. This is not free. This is not free stuff. We paid for this. Somebody's paying for this. So would you like to help pay for this? And would you maybe even like to help pay for somebody else? And I don't know. I don't want to be ignorant in that maybe that hurts the conversation somewhere else, that I don't live in a different place, and so maybe people don't sign up because they don't want to be one of the people who doesn't contribute. I'm not trying to say that might be difficult conversation somewhere else, but it's just a thought of where can we get people to opt in versus force a fee. Yeah. But that's not guaranteed from someone.
Other thoughts?
I think just in case there's any question, I would be opposed to fees for any sort of sports, extracurricular clubs, any of that couldn't be waived for families that couldn't afford them.
Yeah.
To me, that is at the core of who we are, is that kids who want to participate in X are never going to be excluded solely because they can't afford to when their classmates can. So to the extent we're looking at any of this, I speak for myself personally only, I would not want that to preclude.
why are we letting people park for free in October on Salem Heights property? Why are we not charging them $5?
Oh, the city has the bus from here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why can't we not charge them $5? Why can't the city charge these people $5 to get on that bus? We would make a freaking killing. It's just blows my mind. The amount of mess and destruction that they leave every weekend on this property alone. That there needs to, I'm sorry, I don't mean to say need a lot, I apologize for using that word so much. I would strongly encourage that becomes part of the conversation.
In addition to the fact that we don't have spots on campus for weekend things.
Yes.
So that's a whole other thing. I have a few things. I love the idea of opting into fees in some way, shape, or form. I know for band, like there is that whole, you can, for like the sweatshirts and stuff, you can contribute to get another one for somebody else. But for other fees and things, that would be great. I'm really worried about the equity piece and having kids feel badly about their home situations more than they already feel badly about their home situations because there's now fees involved in it. So in any way we can figure out not to force the fee piece, but to have that opt-in, to have that be an option, I think would be great. And just a random thing related to the bus, can we utilize like the skipper for something? And I was thinking, I don't know how many kids go on the late bus, but if there can be options around like using the same skipper.
The skipper is challenging because of, it's not the most reliable in terms of like picking up on, at certain times, and not every parent feels comfortable putting their child on the skipper, especially like middle schoolers. Kids do use it a lot. I see it pulling up here quite a bit. So it is a great service. In a lot of communities, they use public transportation for the high schoolers. It doesn't seem that would work here with the revenue routes, but I do think that we could look at the other thing we do have on buses, which I hesitate to offer this. We do provide monitors on bus. We do pay for monitors in every bus, which is not common in every district. Certain buses, like some of our special education buses, should need a monitor. But on the big buses, although there are a lot of issues on school buses, as you all.
Even with the monitors.
Even with the monitors. And I can tell you, as a principal, I would spend the first 2 hours of my day with the buses in Boston. And we didn't have monitors on the buses. It is a fee. It's part of our transportation contract that all the big buses have monitors. So I've thought about, do we take the monitors off? It's a little bit of a gamble, and then maybe have a certain amount depending on which bus. Certain buses might need monitored more than others. But so that's something we've talked about with transportation. We are really generous with transportation, as you all. The challenge is this community is not easy. It is not big, but it's also hard. Our schools are not a good location for where the kids live. This is not a good location for a school, just because of where the families live. Collins isn't exactly easy for families to get to. And so, like right now, I get requests almost daily from people to ride the buses, who are not mandatory riders, but because of extenuating circumstances, snow on the ground, and all, But we are generous. We are very, very generous. It's and to your point, it has helped us with chronic absenteeism. I do think it's been a factor that we've been really aggressive in getting more kids on buses, and we've taken a strong support stand. But on the flip side, that is a place where we are very, very generous. So.
To that note, I would really hate to see the late bus go away, particularly at the middle school level. I don't know how much it's used at the high school level, but I would really hate to see that go away at the high school level.
Can I ask a question? Because like the reality is all of what we're talking about are very small numbers compared to staff or programming, right? And at 4.5 million, like we can spitball lots of these ideas, but it's much bigger. I'm just like, tell me if my reality is not right, but to me, like the reality is a number that's larger than the kind of stuff we're talking about.
So, yes and no. Yes, if we didn't have yonder pouches anymore, we would save probably $30,000.
I have a suggestion. The end of the year, the number of parents I had reach out to me last year saying, what do we do with these? Like, do we collect them at the end? Like, are we buying them for
Yeah, we
kids
buy them
every
every
year?
year.
Because that needs to get better. Whatever the system is not working.
Well, it works, Commons is where it works the best. But they get pretty beat up at the end of the year, so we buy new ones. Last year we did have a grant for it, so we really didn't spend money last year. This year we spent $30,000.
I also think if kids are being disrespectful and cutting them open, then we should replace them. Like, that's a small enough amount
But-
of money that
Yeah.
To your point, that is not going to solve our budget gap.
Yeah.
But I think looking hard at every expense that we have, is the first step to getting there.
Yeah.
Monitors.
A place we're gonna look, and knows this because we talked, we have to look at the specialists at the elementary level, because we now have small schools, and every school, we wanna offer music, art, and physical education. We've added library or digital media specialists. But now with how small the schools are, Salem is also gonna be a very small school next year for that 1 year. There's going to have to be some sharing of some specialties. Doesn't mean any kid's going to lose some of the opportunity to have those specialists, but we have excess time in buildings because of now that some of the schools have contracted. So we have to look at that. We also will have a longer school day next year, and so that allows for more stuff to happen. When I say longer, in the elementary schools, we will have more time. And so we just have to look at our scheduling. There's definitely excess positions that in that, and that kids will not lose the opportunity to have what I think is necessary, all the specialty programs, but they may have to be shared, between schools in ways we haven't done in the past. To Ann's point, we're really looking at hopefully we're not, it's not about, we do have some teachers who are retiring. We have teachers that are not certified, that are on waivers. We have teachers that we don't necessarily want to bring back next year. And so we think we can do a lot of this through, attrition in certain roles. We would like to keep the class sizes at least where they are right now, comparable. And we have, just to be clear, we've asked principals to come to us with their suggestions. It's always interesting. Principals never want to give anything up. When you tell them that they have to give something up, it is interesting to see what they come up with as less essential for their schools than others. And not all of it is positions. There's other things in there as well that they have recommended that seem to be. So through that, we think we can get to that point. That being said, there are going to have to be some positions that are eliminated, both in schools and at the central office level. We are going to have to eliminate some roles, and people are going to have to pick up a little bit more work. Yes.
I don't know if I'm opening up a can of worms maybe, but now that college is free,
Yes.
does it make sense for us to be having a college program in our high school?
We don't pay for any of that.
Okay.
That's all. That's a great question.
Transportation for it?
We don't pay for any of it. No, the only thing we pay for is the early college promise, which is the 5th year of high school, which is an overlap for kids. We are not going to continue that next year because of Mass Educator, which is that community college is free, and that was at North Shore, so we will not be paying for that. But the early college programming in Salem State and North Shore, we get grants from the state. Well, Salem State also gets funding, so we don't pay a thing for that. That's all free.
So I also would say, I know that some of the AP classes at Salem High are pretty small, but there's a lot of those that I would really hate to see go away.
Yeah, we're looking at the schedule at Salem High too, because and Kate can talk a little bit about this. For the size of the school, we do offer a ton of classes. We do want to maintain the fact that, so what you folks were saying, I think people like that, they appreciate the offerings, and we want to maintain some of those, but we also have some sections that are really, really small. And we also have a schedule that is pretty involved in terms of like I don't know, Kate, if you want to talk more about it, but we have an 8 period, the kids take 8 classes.
Right.
That's a lot of classes. There are ways for us to be more thoughtful in how we schedule here, and we have a team looking at that right now.
Yeah, they like there are lots of different opportunities.
They do.
I think part of it too is though when the courses are offered, so in your 4 years, you still have access, but we're offering them all the time. And to that end, some are very under-enrolled. We're looking at the course loads, the schedules of individual teachers and departments, and just seeing where there might be some efficiencies, and then also looking, to the core values around equity and the amount of prep time and common planning time here versus in our middle school and elementary schools, and trying to equate that.
Yeah, I'm just, I know a lot of people are a fan of the early college, but as a family who just really wants my child to be in high school when they're in high school and college when they're in college, I just really hope that we're not doing away with physics 2.
Yeah, no, we also know that.
Study physics because she's loving that class.
Yeah, we know the kids like to do AP classes as well, so, and there's some high demand for those classes. Those are not classes we want to eliminate. But early college does not cost this. I'm sorry. No, that's all right. Thank you for this.
Thank you for coming. So the floor is open. As we're getting close to time, and I want to be respectful of your time, but any thoughts that you have about places we should look for small expenses, large expenses, positions, programs? I mean, it really is, I think everything is on the table because we want to make sure we're making the highest and best use of the resources we have, which we know our expenses are more than our resources. So we're going to be thinking about everything. Yes.
So the solar systems that we have on a couple of schools, is it possible that we get them on other schools? Is it going to be like a roof replacement situation? That's why we don't have them. The ones that we do have, if one is broke, can that be repaired? So we're actually giving a little money back to them, like utilizing what we have.
And I think that we need a solar panel strategy, which comes up from time to time with our looking at decarbonization and how we're advancing the city's goals. So I think it's worth exploring. I don't know the answer. This isn't your last opportunity to think about this. This is our first official budget forum. We have another one next week. It is online. We actually have 2 next week, one for the community and one for our staff. Both are online. We also have this email address that I encourage you to send any ideas to that you have about questions we should be asking, things we should be looking at, things we should be considering this year. It goes to the superintendent and it comes to me. So it is read by a real person or 2. So don't be shy about asking hard questions, because this is the time that we need the hard questions. We always need hard questions, but we really need them now, and we really need your thinking. Mary, did you want to say anything? You look like you.
Actually, I was just thinking, I know that as a committee, as a finance committee, I think we would like to hear what folks don't, what people really need.
Thank you.
We talked pretty much tonight about what we could possibly live without.
You know what?
I think if folks have, please don't eliminate this. we would like to hear that.
You know what? Let's go out on that note. That is a good way to end. And I said we were going to talk about it, and I forgot. So thank you. Things we can't live without.
Music and arts and CTE.
What else to say to you are?
What else? Yeah.
Pre-K and programming at the high school that keeps kids excited to be in district and not leaving, which we would be paying for them to attend. CTE, AP, early college. And I actually would say early college with an underline. I have an opposite reaction.
Other thoughts of things we just can't
Just
do.
a quick question on the CTE. Do we charge other districts to come in?
Beverly pays us for the kids that come from Beverly. So yes, we have.
Okay. I mean, expanding that is never a bad idea because I know from working with high schoolers, like trying to get into Essex Tech is now you have to be straight A, AP, willing to pay to play kind of situation. And so it's invaluable to have a CTE program here.
Yeah, so that's another revenue generator is bringing kids from other districts. Salem Prep also is a school we can bring students in from the outside. We've been talking about how we better market that as an option because all those are revenue generators for the district for sure.
Yeah. Because I'm in Beverly, so I know Beverly pushes the CTE programming here for a lot of their students, so.
One thing we heard last week, we have a dinner program here. We have lunch, of course, at all schools and are broadening the locally sourced purchases for our lunch program. Hot breakfast here and at Collins. And the parents asked us, don't get rid of the lunch or meal program. So we are reimbursed for that, so it costs us nothing. And we won't get rid of it. That was another thing that came up of things we can't live without. Other things that you just love about Salem that we can't live without?
I spoke with Steve about this. We spend a lot of money, necessary money, sending some of our our special education students out of district. And I'm glad Jen is here. But what is precluding us from collaborating with Peabody, Beverly, Salem, maybe Lynn, I'm not sure, to create our own sub-separate classroom that might be closer and we can share the wealth. So if we had a sub-separate classroom that 4 or 5 students might be able to stay closer to home and we tuitioned in from Peabody and from Beverly, and Peabody had a classroom that we could tuition our student out to. And rather than sending it, because some of our students are on a bus for a very long time in the morning and the afternoon, being tuitioned out, and that costs a lot of money. Why are we not looking at a collaboration like that? And it wouldn't be for this year. We couldn't possibly get it ready for September. I don't know if this is pie in the sky, but if we're talking about, because we've talked about CTE and bringing them in, why are we not doing this for some of our sub-separate classrooms? I don't know enough to know what I don't know. But it seems to me that maybe we could resource with more local communities and utilize our connections with Peabody and Beverly in that way.
So this year we do tuition in because we from a lot of districts around us. So we do our TSP programs, post high. So we do the tuition in as many kids as we can, as we have spots for. As you know, we've had students from the district and we've expanded some of our subsets.
We have a very low percentage of students in our district for an urban district of our size. So most of the kids that are out are very specialized medical or very specialized programs, even for our students that can be outdoor behavior. We just don't have a big enough of a population to have a sub-separate, and neither does a lot of the districts around us. So a lot of our students that are out of district, it is like a one-off, and they're very specialized.
programs. That being said, we do collaborate with a lot of our districts around us. Last year, we did have a couple of kids that we were pushing into PUD, and vice versa.
Okay, it just seems like we are spending a lot of money sending our students out, and they're spending a lot of time on buses when we could keep them here closer to home and utilize that time instead of sitting on a bus, being with their peers and being in a classroom or being with an educator where they would probably get more services than being sitting on a bus.
Yeah, agreed. But again, we have very few kids that are at district, and it's usually for very specific, for reasons that we can't.
Got it. That was my thought. It's freezing in here. I'm sorry.
We're saving money.
Other thoughts about things that we can't live without, and then we'll wrap it up.
I think just looking at all of these through an equity lens, as I know everybody in this district always does, and just being a place where kids are not excluded from anything because of the needs of their families.
Well, we will continue to use our equity lens as we build this budget this year. Please share your thoughts. If you want to join us next week, we can share the link and final
just a
words.
reminder to all of you too that, so there's these forums, but then the school committee has meetings that are public where there's be a lot of discussion. I think our first presentation on budget is April 7th. That's the initial proposal, and then there'll be a budget hearing, and then there'll be eventually the school committee will vote on the budget. So there's multiple opportunities. There'll also be a series of budget finance meetings with Mary Ann chairs that are open to the public. So there's going to be a lot of discussion. We'll eventually have like the actual positions and programs on the table that we're looking to, that we'll be proposing to eliminate. So you'll have an opportunity to comment on those. We just really want to hear what people's priorities are, what their ideas are right now. But this is by no means, we're on a journey here. This is going to be over the next couple of months. I am confident that we're going to come to a good place. It isn't going to be without, some difficult conversations. Decisions are going to have to be made. I'm sure the school committee will debate and banter different ideas around. But your perspectives as families are really important as we, because there isn't exactly like, these are not like a series of good choices. These are all challenging choices that we have to make. But I am confident that we can maintain, the integrity of what we do and make sure that we continue on a positive path and offer the many things that I know people choose our system for. Our enrollment keeps going up. We want to keep it that way. That's really important. If we were talking about declining enrollment, we'd be in way worse shape than we are. But our enrollment has gone up the last 4 or 5 years, and so we need to keep on that trend. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it. We'll stick around if anybody has any questions. And then remind your friends, neighbors, and enemies or whoever to come to our next budget forums next Monday night on Zoom from 6 to 7:30.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you all very much.